My mother is inviting you to dinner today. I read a message from my wife for days after my wedding. At the end of the evening, my mother-in-law said something in Italian to my wife, and they both laughed. Before leaving, I smiled, took my mother-in-law by the hand, and said in perfect Italian, "For days." That's how long I'd been married before I received what I can only describe as the first official summons of my new life. Not a love note, not a sweet text asking how my day was going, but a message that made my stomach drop faster than a bad investment portfolio. My mom is inviting you to dinner tonight. She insists. I stared at my phone screen like it had just delivered news of an impending audit from the IRS. The word insists wasn't just casually dropped in there like a suggestion to maybe try that new Thai place downtown. No, this was the kind of insist that comes with invisible fine print, the kind that says failure to appear will result in eternal grudges and passive-aggressive holiday cards for the next 3 decades. This wasn't an invitation. This was a summons wrapped in a thin veil of familial politeness. An ambush disguised with silverware and cloth napkins. I sat there on our couch, still in my work clothes, tie loosened like a noose temporarily escaped, and let out a sigh that could have powered a small wind turbine. My thumbs hovered over the keyboard, and I typed out the only socially acceptable response a newly married man could give. Sure, can't wait. The lie tasted bitter, even through text message. I added a smiley face emoji for good measure, because nothing says I'm genuinely excited about this like a yellow circle with a forced grin. Then I did what any rational person would do when faced with imminent evaluation by their spouse's family. I walked to the bathroom mirror and started practicing my polite hostage smile. You know the one. It's that expression that says, "I'm thrilled to be here," while your eyes scream, "Please send help." I tried a few variations. The slight head tilt with raised eyebrows, the casual lean-in with genuine-looking interest, the classic, "I'm listening intently to this story I've already heard twice." None of them looked convincing. But hey, fake it till you make it, right? I needed backup, or at least someone to tell me I was overreacting. So I called Mark, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been there through my awkward dating phase, my quarter-life crisis, and that unfortunate period where I thought growing a mustache would make me look distinguished. He picked up on the second ring, probably because he could sense distress through cellular waves. "What's up, man?" he answered, the sound of a video game paused in the background. "I've been summoned," I said dramatically. "Sophia's mom wants me over for dinner tonight." The pause that followed was loaded with significance. Then Mark burst out laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full-blown, almost choking kind of laugh that told me everything I needed to know about my situation. "Bro," he finally managed between gasps, "that's not dinner. That's not even a casual family meal. That's orientation into the in-law empire. That's the empire striking back. Man, you're about to get the full inspection. Background check, credit score evaluation, 5-year plan interrogation, the works." "You're not helping," I muttered, though I knew he was probably right. Mark had been married for 2 years, which, in married guy years, made him basically a seasoned veteran, a wise sage who'd survived the trenches and lived to tell the tale. "Listen," he continued, his tone shifting to something resembling actual advice. "Just remember, everything you say tonight will be documented, analyzed, and potentially used against you at future family gatherings for the rest of your natural life. Don't mention anything about your college partying days. Don't bring up that time you accidentally set the kitchen on fire making quesadillas. And for the love of God, do not, I repeat, do not criticize any of her cooking, even if it tastes like cardboard soaked in disappointment. Got it? Be perfect. Be boring. Be forgettable." Exactly. You're catching on. After hanging up with Mark, I looked at myself in the mirror again, this time with the grim determination of a soldier preparing for battle. I wasn't nervous. Okay, that's a lie. I was absolutely nervous, but I prefer to think of myself as strategically aware. See, here's the thing about a man's first dinner with his wife's family post-wedding. It's a performance that determines your social credit score for the foreseeable future. Nail it, and you're golden. Invited to every birthday, holiday, and random Tuesday barbecue. Bomb it, and suddenly you'll develop a remarkable talent for forgetting about family gatherings, coming down with mysterious illnesses every Thanksgiving, and having urgent work emergencies whenever there's a family reunion. Sophia came home about an hour before we needed to leave, looking annoyingly cheerful about the whole thing. She kissed me on the cheek and immediately went to the bedroom to change, humming some song I didn't recognize. Meanwhile, I stood there wondering if it was too late to fake a minor medical emergency. Nothing serious. Maybe just a sudden onset of food poisoning or a spontaneous allergy to in-laws? "You're gonna love my mom once you get to know her," Sophia called from the bedroom, as if reading my thoughts through walls. "I'm sure I will," I called back, which was technically not a lie because I phrased it as a future possibility rather than a current reality. I changed into what I hoped was an appropriate outfit. Nice jeans, not the ones with the hole near the pocket, a button-down shirt that said, "I'm responsible, but not uptight," and shoes that I'd actually polished for once. I looked in the mirror one final time, straightened my collar, and gave myself a little pep talk that would have made any motivational speaker cringe. "You got this, Daniel. You're a functional adult with a job, a car that runs most of the time, and a decent credit score. You can handle one dinner with your mother-in-law. People do this every day and survive, probably." Sophia emerged from the bedroom looking effortlessly beautiful, which seemed unfair considering she wasn't the one about to be evaluated like a used car on a dealership lot. "Ready?" she asked, grabbing her purse. "As I'll ever be," I replied, which was perhaps the most honest thing I'd said all day. As we headed to the car, I realized that this dinner was inevitable, a rite of passage that every married person has to endure. This was my trial by fire, my initiation ceremony, my official welcome to the complex and sometimes terrifying world of extended family dynamics. I buckled my seatbelt and thought about Mark's words, orientation into the in-law empire. Well, if tonight was orientation, I just hoped I'd pass the entrance exam. Sophia's parents lived in one of those neighborhoods where every house looked like it had its own PR team and a strict dress code for visitors. You know, the type. Manicured lawns so perfect they looked photoshopped, driveways that were cleaner than most people's kitchen floors, and an overall vibe that screamed, "Your Honda Civic doesn't belong here." As we pulled up to their house, I swear the entire street seemed to pause and judge us. Even the trees looked pretentious, standing there all tall and perfectly trimmed like they'd never had a bad hair day in their lives. The house itself was a monument to suburban success. 2 stories of "we're doing better than you" energy, complete with those fancy shutters that serve absolutely no functional purpose except to tell visitors that, yes, these people have disposable income. The front porch had those decorative pillars that made the entrance look like a miniature version of a Greek temple, because apparently that's what says "Welcome to our humble abode" these days. There was even a little fountain in the front yard, trickling water in that annoyingly peaceful way that made me instantly need to pee. I parked my car, which suddenly looked very aware of its Kia status, and took a deep breath that was probably 50% oxygen and 50% pure anxiety. Sophia reached over and squeezed my hand, giving me one of those encouraging smiles that wives give their husbands right before they throw them into the deep end of the family pool. "They're going to love you," she whispered, which is exactly what people say when they're not entirely convinced of the statement themselves. "Sure they will," I replied, unbuckling my seatbelt with the enthusiasm of someone heading to a root canal. As we walked up the pristine stone pathway, seriously, not a single pebble out of place, I noticed that even the doorbell looked expensive. It was one of those fancy video doorbell things that probably had better security clearance than most government buildings. Before I could even reach for it, the door swung open and there stood Sophia's father, Antonio. Now, Antonio Rossi was the kind of guy who'd clearly mastered the art of strategic neutrality. He had that diplomatic smile down to a science, warm enough to seem welcoming, but measured enough to maintain plausible deniability if things went south. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt that screamed, "I'm casual, but I still iron my clothes." And his handshake was firm without being aggressive, friendly without being overeager. This was a man who'd spent years perfecting the delicate balance of being married to a strong-willed woman, and his entire demeanor suggested he'd learned when to speak up and, more importantly, when to strategically retreat to the garage. "Daniel, good to see you again," he said, his voice carrying that careful enthusiasm of someone who'd been thoroughly briefed on proper greeting protocols. Come in, come in. How was the drive?" "Not bad," I replied, stepping into a foyer that looked like it had been staged for a home design magazine. Traffic was pretty light. That's good, Antonio nodded, already running out of small talk ammunition. I could see it in his eyes, the silent plea of one man to another that said, "I'm on your side, but I live here, so my hands are tied." Then, like a perfectly timed theatrical entrance, she appeared. Eleanor Mossi, my brand new mother-in-law, emerged from what I assumed was the kitchen. And let me tell you, this woman had presence. She didn't just walk into a room. She claimed it, conquered it, and immediately established the rules of engagement. Every single hair on her head was in its designated position, probably held there by a combination of expensive hair products and sheer force of will. She wore pearls, actual pearls, like they were casual everyday accessories, and they sat around her neck like a choker of authority, a tangible reminder that this was her kingdom, and we were all just visiting. Her outfit was what I'd call intimidatingly put together. A silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly car payment, slacks with a crease so sharp they could slice bread, and shoes that clicked on the hardwood floor with the precision of a metronome, keeping time to the rhythm of judgment. "Daniel, darling," she said, and I immediately noticed that her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you'd see in a corporate boardroom right before someone announces layoffs. She approached me with her arms slightly extended, and I braced myself for what turned out to be the most performative hug I'd ever experienced, complete with air kisses on both cheeks that came nowhere near actual contact with my face. Then she stepped back, and I felt her eyes scanning me from head to toe like one of those airport security scanners, except this one was checking for signs of inadequacy, poor life choices, and insufficient income brackets. Her gaze lingered on my shirt, a perfectly acceptable button-down that I'd literally bought last week, and I swear I could see her mentally cataloging everything wrong with it. "You look comfortable," she finally said, and the way she said comfortable made it sound like a diagnosis rather than a compliment. The word hung in the air between us like an accusation, like she'd just caught me showing up to a black tie event in sweatpants. Now, I had two choices here. I could get defensive, or I could play it smooth. I chose smooth, channeling every ounce of confidence I could muster while internally screaming. "Thank you," I said with my best diplomatic smile, the one I'd been practicing in the mirror. "Comfort is underrated these days, don't you think? Everyone's so stressed out all the time, walking around in clothes that require special breathing techniques. I figure life's too short to be uncomfortable in your own shirt." Sophia coughed slightly beside me, probably trying to cover a laugh or possibly a groan. It was hard to tell. Antonio's eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement, though he quickly disguised it by suddenly becoming very interested in closing the front door. Elena's expression didn't change, but I noticed the slightest tightening around her eyes, like she was recalculating her initial assessment. "Well," she said, drawing out the word like she was buying time to load her next verbal ammunition, "I suppose that's one way to look at it. Shall we move to the living room? Dinner won't be ready for another few minutes, and I thought we could chat chat was definitely code for interrogation, but I nodded pleasantly and followed her into a living room that looked like it had never experienced the joy of someone actually living in it. Everything was pristine, coordinated, and strategically placed. The throw pillows on the couch were arranged with geometric precision. The coffee table books were stacked in order of size. Even the damn magazines were fanned out at perfect angles. This wasn't a living room. This was a showroom, a carefully curated display of domestic superiority. I sat down on the couch, which was somehow both expensive feeling and deeply uncomfortable, probably by design. Sophia sat next to me, close enough that our legs touched, and I was grateful for the moral support. Antonio settled into an armchair with the relieved posture of someone who'd successfully navigated the opening ceremonies and could now fade into the background. Elena perched on the edge of the opposite couch, spine straight, hands folded in her lap, looking every bit like a queen preparing to hold court. The battle lines had been drawn. The arena had been established. I was officially in the lion's den, and the lion was wearing pearls and judging my shirt. This was going to be a long evening. When Elena finally announced that dinner was ready, I felt like a defendant being called to the stand. We all filed into the dining room, which was somehow even more intimidating than the living room, if that was possible. The table looked like it had been professionally styled for a magazine shoot, the kind of setup that makes you wonder if you're actually supposed to eat the food or just admire it from a safe distance. The tablecloth was crisp white linen, probably imported from some European country where they take their table linens very seriously. The plates weren't just plates. They were fine china with delicate gold trim that screamed, "If you chip me, you'll be paying off the debt until your grandchildren graduate college." The silverware gleamed under the chandelier light like it had been individually polished by trained professionals. Each fork and knife positioned at exactly the right angle, according to some ancient dining etiquette manual that normal people have never heard of. Even the napkins were folded into these elaborate shapes that looked like origami swans, and I was genuinely afraid to unfold mine because it seemed like destroying art. There were wine glasses, multiple wine glasses per person actually, because apparently one glass isn't enough when you're trying to impress people. There were little plates for bread, separate plates for salad, and what I can only assume were specialty plates for foods I didn't even know existed. The whole setup had this unspoken message written all over it. We have standards here, and your IKEA dining set doesn't meet them. I sat down carefully, hyper-aware of every movement I made, like I was diffusing a bomb made of social expectations and breakable dishware. Sophia sat beside me, looking completely comfortable in this environment, which made sense since she'd grown up with this level of dinner theater. Antonio took his seat at the head of the table with the weary acceptance of someone who'd sat through thousands of these performances. And Elena, naturally, positioned herself where she could maintain maximum eye contact with me throughout the meal. The food started arriving, course after course of elaborately prepared dishes that looked almost too beautiful to eat. There was some kind of antipasto spread with olives, cheeses, and cured meats arranged in patterns that suggested someone had taken a food styling class. Then came a salad with ingredients I couldn't even name, drizzled with what was probably some artisanal balsamic vinegar that cost more per ounce than gold. The main course was lasagna, but not just any lasagna. This was the kind of lasagna that had probably taken 8 hours to prepare and came with its own backstory about authentic family recipes passed down through generations. I'll admit, everything tasted incredible. But here's the thing about eating amazing food while being interrogated. It loses some of its appeal when you're trying to chew, swallow, and formulate acceptable answers to invasive questions all at the same time. And oh boy, did Elena have questions. She didn't waste any time diving straight into what I can only describe as a full-scale background check disguised as polite dinner conversation. This wasn't small talk. This was reconnaissance, intelligence gathering, a systematic evaluation of my entire existence up to this point. "So, Daniel," she began, dabbing at her mouth with her swan napkin, "tell me about where you grew up. What kind of neighborhood was it?" I swallowed my bite of lasagna, buying myself a few seconds. I grew up in the suburbs. Pretty standard middle-class neighborhood, tree-lined streets, kids playing in the yards, that kind of thing. Nothing fancy, but it was a good place to be a kid. She nodded, but her expression suggested she was filing this information away in some mental database marked socioeconomic background, adequate but unimpressive. "And your parents, what do they do?" "My dad's a high school teacher, history and social studies. My mom worked as a nurse until she retired a few years ago." "How lovely," Elena said in a tone that suggested it was anything but lovely. "Public service professions. Very noble." I couldn't tell if that was genuine respect or thinly veiled disappointment that my parents weren't surgeons or lawyers, but I smiled and nodded like I'd just received a compliment. Then came the career questions, which I'd been dreading since I walked through the door. "Sophia mentioned you work in marketing," Elena continued, taking a sip of wine that somehow looked judgmental. "How's the job market in that field? Stable, I hope? Do you make enough money to support my daughter, or am I going to have to stage an intervention in 6 months?" "It's pretty stable, actually," I replied, trying to sound confident without sounding defensive. "I've been with my company for 4 years now, got promoted last year to senior account manager. The industry's always evolving, which keeps things interesting, but there's steady demand for what we do." "And the pay is sufficient?" She actually asked that out loud at the dinner table with a straight face. Antonio cleared his throat uncomfortably, and Sophia shot her mother a look that could have melted steel. But Elena just blinked innocently, like she'd asked about the weather. "We're doing fine," I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant, even though internally I was calculating exactly how many olives I'd need to shove in my mouth to choke myself out of this conversation. Maybe 12. Definitely 12. But Elena wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. The questions kept coming, each one more invasive than the last, like she was working from a checklist titled, "Everything you need to know about your son-in-law to decide if he's worthy." "Do you have any student loans remaining? What are your thoughts on home ownership versus renting? Have you started thinking about retirement savings? You can never start too early, you know. Do you plan to pursue any additional education or certifications?" With each question, I took another bite of food, using chewing as a socially acceptable stalling tactic. The lasagna was getting less delicious with every invasive inquiry, and I was starting to understand why people developed stress eating habits. At this rate, I was going to finish the entire pan of lasagna just to avoid having to form coherent sentences. Antonio, bless his heart, tried periodically to redirect the conversation into safer territory. During a brief pause in Elena's questioning, probably while she was mentally reviewing her notes for the next round, he jumped in with the enthusiasm of someone throwing a life preserver to a drowning man. "Do you like football, Daniel?" he asked, his eyes practically begging me to give him something, anything to talk about that wasn't related to my financial portfolio or life plans. I seized the opportunity like it was the last helicopter out of a war zone. "Absolutely. I'm a Packers fan, actually. Have been since I was a kid." Antonio's face lit up. "No kidding. I'm more of a Giants fan myself, but I respect the Packers. Great organization, rich history." "Yeah, though my fandom mostly just means I lose money on bad bets every season," I added with a laugh, hoping humor would lighten the mood. Antonio actually laughed, a real, genuine laugh that echoed through the dining room. For a brief, beautiful moment, it felt like we were just two guys bonding over sports and the universal experience of making terrible gambling decisions. Elena, however, did not laugh. She didn't even crack a smile. She just sat there, fork hovering over her plate, looking at both of us like we'd started speaking in an alien language. Her expression suggested she was deeply disappointed that we derailed her carefully orchestrated interrogation with something as frivolous as football talk. The moment passed quickly, and the atmosphere returned to its previous state of polite tension. Even the lasagna on my plate seemed to sense the mood shift, sitting there all sad and judged. I looked around the table, taking in the scene. Antonio, trying to look supportive while clearly wishing he was anywhere else. Sophia, attempting to mediate with her presence alone. Elena, maintaining her position as chief inquisitor. And me, just trying to survive this meal without saying anything that would get me permanently banned from future family gatherings. Even the food seemed tense. I swear the lasagna looked uncomfortable. The salad appeared anxious. And the wine in my glass was probably developing stress-related acidity issues. This wasn't dinner. This was a performance evaluation with really good Italian food. We'd somehow made it to dessert, which felt like a small miracle, considering I'd survived the appetizer interrogation, the main course investigation, and what I can only describe as the salad course psychological evaluation. Elena had brought out what she proudly announced was her homemade tiramisu, and I'll give her credit, it looked absolutely incredible. Layers of coffee-soaked ladyfingers and mascarpone cream dusted with cocoa powder, served in individual glass dishes that probably cost more than my monthly Netflix subscription. I was just starting to relax, thinking maybe I'd made it through the worst of it, when Sophia's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and her expression shifted into that particular look that says, "Work emergency," or possibly my friend is having a crisis and needs immediate attention. "I'm so sorry, I need to take this," Sophia said, already pushing her chair back. "It's Jessica. She's been having issues with her wedding planner and she's kind of freaking out." "Of course, honey, go ahead," Elena said, suddenly all sweetness and understanding, which should have been my first warning sign that something was about to go sideways. Sophia stepped out of the dining room, her voice already shifting into that soothing, "I'm going to help you solve this problem" tone as she headed toward the front hallway. And just like that, I was alone at the table with Antonio and Elena, feeling suddenly very exposed, like a gazelle that had just been separated from the herd. For a moment, there was silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy and loaded, like the air right before a thunderstorm. I focused on my tiramisu, taking a careful bite and making all the appropriate appreciative sounds, because the last thing I needed was to offend Elena's baking skills on top of everything else. Then Elena leaned toward her husband just slightly and said something in Italian. Her voice was low, casual, like she was making an offhand comment about the weather or the temperature in the room. But there was something about her tone, a little edge of amusement, a hint of smugness, that made my internal alarm system start blaring. Antonio chuckled in response, a quick, uncomfortable laugh that men make when their wives say something they know they shouldn't agree with, but also know better than to contradict. He shot me a glance, one of those "don't mind her" looks that attempted to communicate sympathy across the table while also maintaining plausible deniability. Now here's where things get interesting. Elena clearly assumed that I, like most Americans she'd probably encountered, had absolutely no idea what she just said. She probably thought Italian was her secret code language, a safe space where she could say whatever she wanted without consequence, like having a private conversation right in front of someone who couldn't understand. It's the kind of move people pull when they assume linguistic superiority, when they think they've got a built-in privacy shield. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have possibly known unless Sophia had mentioned it, which she apparently hadn't, was that I speak Italian. Not just, I took a semester in college and can order pasta Italian, but actually fluent, conversational, read Italian literature in the original language Italian. My grandmother, Nonna Isabella, was from Naples. She came to the United States when she was 23, married my grandfather, and proceeded to raise her kids in a household where Italian wasn't just spoken, it was the primary language. My dad grew up bilingual, and he made sure I did too. Some of my best childhood memories are sitting in Nana's kitchen while she cooked, teaching me Italian phrases and idioms, correcting my pronunciation, and telling me stories about growing up in Italy. She'd quiz me on verb conjugations while stirring sauce, make me read Italian newspapers at the breakfast table, and refuse to answer me if I spoke to her in English. In questa casa parliamo italiano, she'd say. In this house, we speak Italian. So when Elena leaned over and whispered to Antonio, "È educato adesso, aspetta finché chiede I soldi," I understood every single word. Every single word. He's polite now. Wait till he asks for money. I nearly choked on my tiramisu. Actually choked, like coffee-soaked ladyfingers going down the wrong pipe, mascarpone cream threatening to exit through my nose, the whole embarrassing production. I grabbed my water glass and took a long drink, partly because I needed to clear my pairway, and partly because I needed a moment to process what I just heard. She thought I was a gold digger. This woman, who'd spent the entire evening evaluating my career prospects, my financial stability, and my long-term earning potential, genuinely believed that I was some kind of opportunistic con artist who'd married her daughter for access to the family bank account. The sheer audacity of it was almost impressive. Here I was, working a full-time job, paying my own bills, never once asking anyone for a dime, and she'd already written me off as a future mooch. I could feel my face getting hot, not from embarrassment, but from pure, unfiltered indignation, mixed with a healthy dose of, "Oh, you've got to be kidding me right now." I set down my fork carefully. Very carefully, because if I held on to it, I might accidentally launch it across the room, and that would definitely not help my case. Antonio must have noticed my reaction because his expression shifted from amused to slightly concerned, like he was suddenly worried he'd laughed at the wrong thing. But Elena just continued eating her tiramisu, completely oblivious to the fact that she'd just detonated a linguistic bomb right in front of someone who understood the explosion. I sat there for a moment, weighing my options. I could let it slide, pretend I didn't understand, swallow my pride along with the dessert, and just move on. That would be the mature thing to do, the diplomatic approach, the path of least resistance. I could be the bigger person, rise above it, let it go. Or, and hear me out here, I could absolutely not do any of those things. See, here's what Elena didn't understand about people who grow up bilingual. We don't just learn the language. We learn the culture, the nuances, the context. We understand not just what words mean, but what they mean when they're said in that particular tone, with that particular inflection. And we definitely understand when we're being insulted in what someone assumes is a secret language. My nana didn't raise me to sit quietly while someone talked trash about me in Italian right to my face. She raised me to be proud of my heritage, to value the gift of being bilingual, and to never, ever let someone assume they could use language as a weapon without consequences. I smiled sweetly, taking another small bite of tiramisu, letting the moment stretch out just a little bit longer. Inside my head, I was already planning my response, crafting exactly what I was going to say and how I was going to say it. This wasn't going to be some aggressive confrontation or a dramatic scene. No, this needed to be handled with precision, with style, with just the right amount of surprise. I understood everything you just said, and now you're going to regret it. Elena caught my eye and smiled at me. One of those patronizing smiles that said, "You poor, oblivious American boy who has no idea what I just said about you." She probably thought she was being so clever, so subtle. She probably felt quite pleased with herself for getting away with her little commentary. Oh, Elena, sweet, unsuspecting, about to have her entire evening turned upside down. Elena, I was about to serve her a slice of humble pie to go with that tiramisu. And unlike her dessert, mine was going to be delivered in her native language. The setup was perfect. Sophia was still on the phone in the other room, giving me the space to handle this my way. Antonio was watching nervously, probably sensing that something was about to happen, but not quite sure what. And Elena was sitting there completely confident in her assumed linguistic superiority, with absolutely no idea that the polite, accommodating son-in-law she'd been judging all evening was about to flip the entire script. I set down my spoon, dabbed my mouth with my napkin. The swan had been destroyed anyway, no point in trying to preserve it now, and prepared to introduce Elena to a side of me she hadn't anticipated meeting. This was going to be good. This was going to be very, very good. I heard Sophia's voice trailing off in the hallway, the telltale sign that her phone call was wrapping up. Perfect timing. I wanted her to witness this, not because I needed backup, but because, honestly, this moment deserved an audience. What I was about to do was either going to be the most brilliant move of my married life, or the thing that would get me permanently uninvited from every future family gathering. Possibly both. Sophia walked back into the dining room, sliding her phone into her pocket and looking slightly apologetic. Sorry about that, everyone. Jessica's wedding planner double-booked her venue, and she was having a complete meltdown. I think I talked her off the ledge, though. No problem at all, dear, Elena said with that practiced maternal warmth that she seemed to reserve exclusively for her daughter. Yeah, I said, pushing my chair back and standing up. And actually, before we move on, there's something I wanted to say. The room got quiet. Antonio's eyes widened slightly, like he could sense incoming turbulence but couldn't quite identify the source. Sophia looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and mild concern, the expression of someone who knows their spouse well enough to recognize when they're about to do something unpredictable. I walked around the table slowly, casually, like I was just stretching my legs after a long meal. But really, I was positioning myself, setting the stage, building the dramatic tension like some kind of dinner theater production. When I reached Elena's side of the table, I gently, and I mean very gently, with the utmost respect, took her hand. She looked up at me, surprised but not alarmed, probably thinking I was about to thank her for the meal or compliment her cooking. Her expression was expectant, almost pleased, like she thought I was finally going to perform the appropriate level of gratitude and deference she'd been waiting for all evening. Signora Elena, I began, my voice calm and measured, switching to formal Italian address with perfect pronunciation. The word signora hung in the air for just a moment, and I watched her expression shift from pleased to confused. Why was I calling her signora? Why did my pronunciation sound so clean, so natural? Before we continue, I continued in English, maintaining eye contact, would you mind writing down which country you're from and how old you are? Her face went from confused to completely frozen, like someone had just pressed pause on a video. Her hand, which had been relaxed in mine, suddenly tensed up. Scusi, she said, the Italian word slipping out automatically, which was interesting because it meant her brain was already starting to panic. And that's when I delivered the knockout punch. So, I know how long it's been since sarcasm became your family language, I said, in absolutely flawless Italian. Not textbook Italian, not tourist Italian, but natural, colloquial, Neapolitan-influenced Italian with the kind of rhythm and intonation that only comes from actually speaking it as a living language. The effect was instantaneous and spectacular. Antonio's spoon, which he'd been holding halfway to his mouth, dropped onto his plate with a clatter that echoed through the suddenly silent dining room like a gunshot. Sophia's jaw literally fell open, and I mean literally in the actual literal sense, not the exaggerated way people usually mean it. Her mouth formed a perfect O of shock. But Elena. Oh, Elena's reaction was the real masterpiece. All the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug and her blood had decided to evacuate the premises. Her eyes went wide, wider than I thought physically possible. And she blinked rapidly, like maybe if she blinked enough times, she could reboot reality and make the last 30 seconds unhappen. Somewhere in the house, I swear I heard the family cat meow nervously, as if even the pets could sense the seismic shift in the household power dynamics. I gave Elena's hand a gentle, respectful squeeze and then released it, stepping back and returning to my seat with the casual confidence of someone who just played their ace card and knew exactly how good it was. I picked up my fork and took another bite of tiramisu, maintaining perfect composure, like I'd just made a comment about the weather rather than completely demolishing the evening's entire social structure. "Lovely dinner, by the way," I added, still in Italian, my tone conversational and pleasant. The judgment was a bit undercooked, but we'll work on it. The silence that followed wasn't just silence. It was the kind of profound, absolute absence of sound that you usually only experience in deep space or those sensory deprivation tanks. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. I'm pretty sure time itself stopped for a moment just to appreciate the magnitude of what had just happened. You could have heard a pin drop. Hell, you could have heard a feather floating gently through the air. You could have heard someone thinking about dropping a pin 3 houses down. The pasta in the kitchen was probably regretting its existence, wishing it had been turned into something less controversial, like plain spaghetti, instead of being associated with this particular family dinner. Sophia was the first to find her voice, though it came out as more of a squeak. You speak Italian?" She said it in English, probably because her brain was too overwhelmed to attempt any other language at the moment. "Only when provoked by pasta politics," I replied smoothly, switching back to English and giving her a small smile. Antonio had set down his spoon and was now just staring at me with something that looked like a mixture of horror, respect, and possibly admiration. His expression seemed to say, "I cannot believe you just did that, and that was the most amazing thing I've ever witnessed." Simultaneously, he opened his mouth like he was going to say something, then closed it again, apparently deciding that no words could adequately address what had just transpired. Elena, meanwhile, had still not recovered. She sat there, statue still, her hand suspended in midair where I'd released it, like her body's operating system had crashed and was struggling to reboot. Her mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish that had just been unexpectedly pulled out of water and was trying to figure out how breathing worked. I took another bite of tiramisu, chewing thoughtfully. "The coffee flavor is really well balanced," I commented, still in Italian, because at this point, why stop? "Did you use espresso or just strong regular coffee?" That seemed to snap Elena partially back to consciousness. She blinked several times in rapid succession, and some color started returning to her face, though it was mostly red now, creeping up from her neck like a thermometer measuring rising embarrassment. "You understood," she stammered, also in Italian now, because apparently we'd all committed to this linguistic direction. "When you said that I'm polite now, but you should wait until I ask for money?" I finished for her, my tone still pleasant and conversational, like we were discussing a recipe rather than her earlier character assassination. "Yes, I understood that perfectly. My grandmother would be so proud that her years of Italian lessons are still paying off. She always said, "Daniel, you never know when being bilingual will come in handy." Turns out, Nana was right. Sophia made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a laugh, quickly covering her mouth with her hand. Antonio had picked up his wineglass and was taking a very long, very deliberate drink, clearly using it as an excuse to not have to participate in this conversation. "I didn't," Elena started, but her voice faltered. "How exactly do you walk back an insult that you thought was secret, but turned out to be perfectly understood?" "Oh, I think you meant exactly what you said," I replied, still keeping my tone light and friendly, which somehow made it more devastating. "And that's fine. You don't know me yet, so I understand the skepticism. But here's the thing, Signora Elena. I work 45 hours a week at a job I'm good at. I pay my own bills. I've never asked anyone for money since I graduated college. And I married your daughter because I love her, not because I'm auditioning for the role of family financial burden." I leaned back in my chair, folding my hands on the table. So maybe, just maybe, we could start over without the secret commentary in any language. The silence returned, but this time it felt different, less shocked, more contemplative. Sophia was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between, "I can't believe you just did that," and "that was kind of incredible." Antonio had set down his wineglass and was nodding slightly, like I'd just articulated something he'd been thinking for 20 years, but never had the courage to say. And Elena? Well, Elena looked like she'd just been checkmated in a game she didn't realize she was playing. Her carefully constructed evening of subtle evaluation and coded commentary had completely collapsed, and now she was sitting in the rubble trying to figure out how to rebuild. The really beautiful part? I hadn't been rude. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't insulted her back. I'd simply revealed that her secret weapon wasn't secret at all, and that maybe, just maybe, she should have asked a few more questions before making assumptions. Checkmate, Signora. Checkmate. The car ride home was absolutely legendary in its awkwardness. I'm talking Hall of Fame level uncomfortable silence. The kind that gets its own exhibit in the Museum of Marital Tension. Sophia and I had said our goodbyes to her parents, which was about as comfortable as hugging a cactus, and walked to the car in complete silence. The kind of silence where you can hear your own heartbeat, the distant sound of crickets judging you, and possibly the universe itself holding its breath to see what happens next. I unlocked the car, we both got in, buckled our seatbelts with synchronized precision like we were astronauts preparing for a space mission, and I started the engine. The radio came on automatically, some pop song about love and summer nights, and Sophia immediately turned it off. That's how you know things are serious. When someone voluntarily chooses silence over background music, you're in uncharted territory. We pulled out of her parents' driveway, and I could feel Sophia's eyes on me. Not angry eyes exactly, but definitely processing eyes. The kind of look that says, "I have thoughts, many thoughts, and I'm organizing them into coherent arguments as we speak." We made it approximately 3 blocks before she broke. "You speak Italian?" she said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and something else I couldn't quite identify. "You speak Italian? Since when? How? Why didn't you tell me?" I kept my eyes on the road, mostly because I was trying not to smile too obviously. Since I was a kid. My nana, my dad's mom, she's from Naples. She basically raised me bilingual, made me speak Italian at home, taught me all the verbs, the whole deal. "And you never thought to mention this?" Sophia's voice went up about half an octave. "We've been together for 2 years, Daniel. 2 years. We've had countless conversations. We got married. At what point were you planning to drop the, 'Oh, by the way, I'm fluent in Italian' bomb?" I shrugged, finally allowing myself a small grin. It never really came up. I mean, it's not like I was actively hiding it. You never asked if I spoke any other languages. We don't exactly hang out in Italian restaurants where I'd have reason to bust it out. That's... Sophia stopped herself, clearly torn between multiple emotions. "That's not the point, Daniel." "Okay, so what is the point?" She was quiet for a moment, and I glanced over to see her staring out the window, her reflection visible in the glass. "You embarrassed her, she finally said, but her voice was softer now, less accusatory. I translated her own script, I countered, switching lanes to avoid a slow-moving truck. She embarrassed herself. I just happened to understand it when she did. Sophia made a sound that might have been a laugh or might have been exasperation. Honestly, probably both. You basically called her out in front of everyone in her own language that she thought was her secret code. She called me a gold digger, I pointed out, keeping my tone reasonable, in what she thought was her secret code, while I was sitting right there eating her tiramisu, which was excellent, by the way, but that's beside the point. I know, Sophia sighed, and I could hear the conflict in her voice. She was caught between defending her mother and acknowledging that, yeah, what Elena had said was pretty messed up. She shouldn't have said that. That was wrong. Extremely wrong, I agreed. I work my ass off. I pay my bills. I've never asked anyone for money. And I married you because I'm completely crazy about you, not because I'm trying to get access to the family fortune, which, no offense to your parents, I wasn't even aware existed until I saw that house. Sophia turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I could see her fighting a smile. That was kind of badass, though, she admitted quietly. What was? The whole thing, the way you handled it, the "how long has sarcasm been your family language" line, the comment about the judgment being undercooked. She paused. The fact that you did it all while being perfectly polite and respectful. Now I did smile, full-on grin. I learned from the best. Nana didn't raise me to be rude. She raised me to be strategic. Strategic, Sophia repeated, and this time she definitely laughed. That's one word for it. We drove in silence for a few more minutes, but this time it was different, less tense, more thoughtful. I could practically hear the gears turning in Sophia's head, processing everything that had happened, recalibrating her understanding of both me and her mother. You know, she's going to call me tomorrow, Sophia said eventually. Probably first thing in the morning, maybe even tonight when we get home. Oh, absolutely. I'd be shocked if your phone doesn't ring before we pull into our driveway. She's going to be upset. She's going to be embarrassed, I corrected. There's a difference. Upset is what you are when someone wrongs you. Embarrassed is what you are when you get caught doing something you shouldn't have been doing. Sophia was quiet again, and then she said something that surprised me. You know what? Good. Maybe she needed to be embarrassed. Maybe she needed someone to finally call her out on her stuff. I glanced over at her, eyebrows raised. Really? Don't get me wrong, I love my mom, Sophia said quickly, but she can be a lot. She's always been this way, judging people, making assumptions, thinking she knows best about everything. And my dad and I just kind of let her do it because it's easier than confronting her. Well, consider her confronted, I said dryly. Sophia laughed again, and this time it was genuine, unreserved. Oh my God, her face! Did you see her face when you started speaking Italian? I thought she was going to pass out right there at the table. Antonio dropped his spoon, I added. It was like a cartoon. I half expected it to bounce. And when you said the judgment was undercooked? Sophia was really laughing now, the kind of laughter that's almost crying, the kind that releases tension that's been building for hours. I wanted to die. I wanted to sink through the floor, but also I kind of wanted to applaud. We pulled up to a red light, and I looked over at her. She was wiping tears from her eyes, still giggling, her whole body shaking with laughter. And suddenly, I wasn't worried anymore. Whatever happened next with Elena, whatever phone calls came, whatever family dynamics needed to be navigated, we were okay. Sophia and I were on the same team. The light turned green, and I accelerated through the intersection. Sophia's phone buzzed in her purse. $20 says that's your mom, I said. She pulled out her phone, looked at the screen, and started laughing again. You win. It's her. Are you going to answer? Sophia looked at the phone, then at me, then back at the phone. You know what? No, not right now. She can wait until tomorrow. Let her think about what she said for a little while. That's cold, I said, impressed. I learned from the best, she replied, echoing my earlier words. You're not the only one who can be strategic. We pulled into our apartment complex parking lot, and Sophia was still staring at her phone, which was now buzzing with a second call. She's persistent, I'll give her that. Elena Rossi doesn't strike me as someone who gives up easily, I observed, parking the car and turning off the engine. She's not, Sophia confirmed, declining the call and putting her phone on silent. But neither are you, apparently. We sat in the car for a moment, neither of us making a move to get out. The parking lot lights cast weird shadows across Sophia's face, and I could see her processing everything, working through the implications of what had happened. Are we going to be okay? I asked quietly. With your parents? I mean, did I just permanently screw up my relationship with your mom? Sophia considered this seriously. Honestly, I think you might have just started an actual relationship with my mom. The real kind, not the fake polite kind where everyone pretends everything is fine. She respects people who stand up to her. She won't admit it, probably ever, but she does. So you're saying I didn't completely destroy everything? Oh, you definitely destroyed something, Sophia grinned. You destroyed her assumption that she could get away with talking about you in Italian. You destroyed her illusion of control. You destroyed the entire power dynamic she'd set up. But that might be exactly what needed to happen. We finally got out of the car and headed up to our apartment. As we climbed the stairs, Sophia slipped her hand into mine. For the record, she said as I unlocked our door, watching you politely demolishing my mother in 2 languages, that was kinda hot. I laughed, pushing the door open. Ladies and gentlemen, sarcasm, saving marriages since forever and destroying mother-in-law relationships. Just translating them accurately, Sophia added. Nah, I said, pulling her inside and closing the door behind us. Just translating them accurately. That night, while Sophia was in the bathroom brushing her teeth, her phone buzzed again on the nightstand. I glanced at it. 3 missed calls and 2 text messages from Elena. Sophia came out, saw me looking at the phone, and shrugged. She'll survive until tomorrow, Sophia said, climbing into bed. We all will. She looked at me in the dim light, and her expression was soft, almost proud. You know what the crazy thing is? What? That was kinda hot. You already said that. It bears repeating, she said, turning off the light and settling in beside me. My husband, the secret Italian speaker, the linguistic ninja, the... Okay, I laughed, pulling her close. Let's not get carried away. But as we lay there in the dark, I couldn't help feeling pretty good about how the evening had turned out. Sure, I'd made things complicated. Sure, there would be phone calls and conversations, and probably some awkwardness ahead. But I'd also drawn a line, established boundaries, and, most importantly, I'd made it clear that I wasn't going to be anyone's punching bag, even in Italian. Translation accomplished. Message received. Game on. The next morning came way too early, announced by the aggressive buzzing of Sophia's phone on her nightstand. I'm talking the kind of persistent, relentless buzzing that says, I'm not going away until you acknowledge my existence. I cracked one eye open and squinted at the clock. 7:23 a.m. on a Saturday. Nobody calls at 7:23 a.m. on a Saturday unless someone died, the house is on fire, or your mother-in-law spent the entire night stewing over being linguistically outsmarted at her own dinner table. Sophia groaned and rolled over, reaching for her phone with one hand while using the other to cover her eyes from the morning sunlight streaming through our bedroom window. I propped myself up on one elbow, suddenly very awake and very interested in how this conversation was about to go down. Hi, Mom, Sophia answered, her voice still scratchy with sleep, but bracing for impact. And then, oh man, then I heard it. Even from my side of the bed, even without the phone on speaker, I could hear Elena's voice coming through that speaker like an opera singer hitting the high notes. The woman had volume, I'll give her that. She had projection, she had passion, she had approximately 17 hours of pent-up indignation that was now flowing out in a torrent of Italian-accented English that somehow made every word sound both dramatic and accusatory. Your husband mocked me in Italian at my own dinner table in front of your father. He made me look like a fool. Sophia sat up fully now, running her free hand through her bedhead hair, and I watched her face cycle through several emotions: sympathy, annoyance, amusement, and finally something that looked like resolution. She took a deep breath, and I could literally see her spine straightening, her shoulders squaring. This was it. This was the moment where Sophia was either going to defend her mother's honor or draw a line in the sand. "Mom," Sophia said, her voice firm but not unkind, "maybe don't insult people assuming they don't understand." Silence. Beautiful, glorious, stunned silence on the other end of the phone. I could practically hear Elena's brain short-circuiting, trying to process the fact that her daughter, her own daughter, was not automatically taking her side in this situation. "What? Sophia, he was rude. He embarrassed me." "No, Mom," Sophia continued, "and I was falling in love with my wife all over again in real time. He called you out for being rude. There's a difference. You literally called him a gold digger while he was sitting right there eating your tiramisu. What did you think was going to happen when he understood every word?" More silence. This one felt heavier, more loaded. I imagine Elena standing in her pristine kitchen, probably already fully dressed and made up, even though it wasn't even 7:30 a.m., her free hand clutching her pearls, literally or figuratively, possibly both. "I didn't know he spoke Italian," Elena said, but her voice had lost some of its fire. Now she just sounded defensive, which was at least a step in the right direction from full-blown outrage. "That's not really the point, though, is it?" Sophia replied, and I was genuinely proud of her for not backing down. "The point is, you shouldn't have said it at all, in any language, about my husband, at your dinner table while he was a guest in your home." I heard muffled sounds that might have been Elena trying to formulate a response, or possibly just breathing heavily into the phone. Hard to tell. "He's a good man, Mom," Sophia said, softer now. "He works hard. He treats me well, and he's never asked anyone for anything. You owe him an apology." And then Sophia did something that absolutely killed me. She looked over at me, made direct eye contact, and mouthed the words, "I love you," while her mother continued sputtering on the other end of the line. The call went on for another few minutes, with Elena gradually deflating from operatically offended to grudgingly contemplative. When Sophia finally hung up, she flopped back onto the pillows and stared at the ceiling. "Well," she said, "that was fun." "Checkmate," I said, grinning at her. She turned her head to look at me. "She's not going to apologize, you know. Not directly. That's not how Elena Rossi operates." "I know," I replied, "but the fact that you stood up for me means everything." "You're my husband," she said simply. "That's literally my job description." I pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Still, thank you." "Thank me by making coffee," she mumbled into my chest. "It's too early for family drama without caffeine." Later that morning, after we'd caffeinated sufficiently and Sophia had filled me in on the full details of the conversation, including the part where Elena tried to claim she was just testing my character, which was absolutely ridiculous, but whatever, my phone buzzed with a text message from Antonio. I opened it with a mixture of curiosity and slight dread, not sure what to expect. Was he going to yell at me via text, demand I apologize, uninvite me from future family gatherings? The message read, "You handled that better than I did in 20 years. Coffee sometime." I literally laughed out loud, startling Sophia, who was curled up on the couch scrolling through her phone. "What's so funny?" "Your dad just asked me to get coffee," I said, showing her the message. Sophia read it and smiled. "Of course he did. You're officially part of the Surviving Elena Club now. It's very exclusive. Membership benefits include commiseration, war stories, and tactical advice on how to avoid controversial topics at holiday dinners." I typed back, "Would love to. Name the time and place." His response came almost immediately. "Tuesday, 10 a.m., that cafe on Maple Street. And Daniel, welcome to the family." The real one. I showed Sophia, and she actually got a little teary-eyed. "He never does this," she said quietly. "He never reaches out to people like this. You really impressed him." "I just spoke Italian and called out your mom," I said, confused by Antonio's enthusiasm. "Exactly," Sophia laughed. "Do you know how long he's been married to her? 32 years. 32 years of nodding and agreeing and strategically hiding in the garage, and you, on day 4 of being officially family, just waltzed in there and politely but firmly told her she was out of line in her native language. He probably thinks you're some kind of superhero." By Monday, the story had spread through my office faster than a rumor about free donuts in the break room. I'd made the mistake of mentioning it to my coworker David during our morning coffee run. And David, who has the discretion of a town crier with a megaphone, had apparently told everyone in the building by lunchtime. "Dude," my colleague Jennifer said, rolling her chair over to my desk, "I heard you basically subtitled your mother-in-law's trash talk in real time." "That's actually a pretty accurate description," I admitted. "That's legendary," she said, high-fiving me. "Absolute legend status. I'm putting you in for Employee of the Month based purely on that story." "It's not really a work achievement," I pointed out. "It's an achievement in general human excellence," Jennifer countered. "Same thing." Even my boss, who normally stayed out of personal drama, stopped by my desk that afternoon. "I hear you speak Italian," he said casually. "We've been trying to close a deal with a company in Milan. Any chance you'd be interested in helping with some translation work?" Sure," I said, slightly blindsided by this turn of events. "I'd be happy to help." "Great. Also, for what it's worth, my mother-in-law only speaks English, and she still terrifies me. So the fact that you handled yours in 2 languages is genuinely impressive." Apparently, standing up to your mother-in-law was a universally relatable experience that transcended culture, language, and workplace boundaries. Tuesday morning came and I met Antonio at the cafe on Maple Street, a cozy little place with exposed brick walls, mismatched furniture, and the kind of pretentious coffee menu that uses words like notes of chocolate and bright acidity. Antonio was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. "I ordered for you," he said as I sat down. "Black coffee, right? You seem like a black coffee guy." "Good call," I said, taking a sip. It was actually really good coffee, the kind that justified the ridiculous price. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, just drinking our coffee and watching the morning crowd shuffle in and out. Students with laptops, business people grabbing their caffeine fix, retired folks reading newspapers like it was still 1997. "So," Antonio finally said, setting down his cup and looking at me directly, "that dinner." "Yeah," I replied carefully, "that dinner." "Elena's been difficult since then," he continued. "Not angry exactly, more like deflated, thoughtful. It's weird. I haven't seen her like this in years." "I didn't mean to cause problems," I started, but Antonio held up a hand. "Problems? Son, you did me a favor. Do you know how long I've been married to that woman? How many times I've watched her steamroll people with her opinions and judgments? How many times I've wanted to say something but didn't because, well, you know, happy wife, happy life and all that." "But you love her," I said, because that seemed important to acknowledge. "Of course I love her," Antonio smiled. "She's brilliant, she's passionate, she's loyal to a fault. But she's also stubborn and judgmental. And sometimes she needs someone to call her on her BS, and you did it perfectly. Respectfully, but firmly, in her own language no less. I've been fantasizing about that moment for 3 decades. I laughed, relaxing into my chair. "So I'm not banned from future family gatherings?" "Banned? Are you kidding? You're mandatory attendance now. I need an ally at that table," Antonio grinned. "Besides, Elena respects you now. She won't admit it, probably not ever, but she does. You stood your ground. That's the only thing she really values." We talked for another hour about everything and nothing. Sports, work, his advice on navigating marriage, never go to bed angry, and always remember where you hid the good snacks. By the time we left, I realized I hadn't just gained a father-in-law. I'd gained a friend. As we walked to our cars, Antonio clapped me on the shoulder. "You know what you did the other night? Ruined dessert," he laughed. "You translated respect, and that's a language Elena understands perfectly." 2 weeks had passed since what I'd started calling the Italian incident in my head, though Sophia preferred the great tiramisu takedown, and Antonio had taken to referring to it as, "That time Daniel broke my wife's brain." We'd all coped with the aftermath in our own ways. Apparently, the dust had settled somewhat. The initial shock had worn off, and life had returned to a semi-normal rhythm. Semi-normal being the operative word here, because nothing is ever truly normal after you linguistically checkmate your mother-in-law at her own dinner table. Sophia had been fielding periodic phone calls from Elena, which had evolved from defensive and huffy to merely terse and businesslike, which I supposed was progress. They talked about neutral topics: the weather, Sophia's work, a new recipe Elena had tried, whether the neighbor's new fence was too tall, carefully skirting around the elephant in the room, or rather the Italian-speaking son-in-law who'd revealed that the Empress had no linguistic clothes. Then, on a perfectly ordinary Thursday afternoon, Sophia came home from work and dropped a bomb that I absolutely should have seen coming, but somehow didn't. "My mom wants us over for dinner this weekend," she announced, setting her bag down and kicking off her shoes with the exhausted sigh of someone who'd spent 8 hours in meetings. I looked up from my laptop, where I'd been pretending to work, but actually online shopping for a new coffee maker because our current one had started making sounds like it was summoning demons. "Come again?" "Dinner, this weekend, Saturday night, my parents' house." Sophia said it matter-of-factly, like she was announcing we needed to pick up milk, not that we were returning to the scene of the crime. "Is this like a trap?" I asked, only half joking. "Am I going to show up and find out it's actually an intervention or a surprise Italian language competency test?" Sophia laughed, collapsing onto the couch next to me. "It's just dinner. She specifically said she wants to try again." Her words. "Try again?" I repeated slowly. "That sounds suspiciously like a person who's been coached by her husband to extend an olive branch." "Oh, Antonio definitely had something to do with this," Sophia agreed. "But still, progress is progress, right?" So that's how 2 days later I found myself once again pulling up to the House of Judgment. Though this time I was significantly less nervous and significantly more curious about how this was going to play out. Sophia had assured me that Elena had promised to be on her best behavior, which was either reassuring or ominous, depending on how you interpreted it. We walked up that same pristine stone pathway, past the pretentious fountain, toward the door with its fancy video doorbell that probably already knew we were coming and had filed a report. Before we could even knock, the door swung open. Antonio stood there, and I swear the man looked relieved to see us, like we were reinforcements arriving at a siege. "Daniel, Sophia, right on time." His enthusiasm was a little too bright, a little too forced. The tone of someone who'd been managing tense household dynamics for the past 14 days and was desperately hoping for a peaceful evening. "Wouldn't dream of being late," I said, shaking his hand. "Good, good," Antonio said, ushering us inside. "Elena's in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on dinner. She's been cooking all day." The subtext was clear. She's been stress cooking all day because she's anxious about this dinner and doesn't know how to process emotions except through elaborate meal preparation. We moved into the living room, still pristine, still looking like a furniture showroom, still featuring those aggressively arranged throw pillows. And then she appeared. Elena Rossi, emerging from the kitchen like an actress making her entrance. Except this time her energy was different. She was still impeccably dressed, still wearing pearls like armor, but something in her posture was less rigid, less commanding. She looked almost uncertain, which for Elena was probably the emotional equivalent of anyone else having a complete meltdown. "Daniel," she said, and I braced myself for whatever was coming next. "So nice to see you again." The words were formal, careful, like she'd rehearsed them, like she was handling explosives and trying very hard not to trigger a detonation. "Nice to see you too, Elena," I replied, matching her tone of cautious diplomacy. "How's work?" she asked, and I had to give her credit. She was trying, actually trying to make conversation without it immediately becoming an interrogation. "Stable," I said, and then, because I apparently can't help myself, I added, "My colleagues now call me Google Translate." There was a beat of silence where everyone held their breath. And then Antonio started laughing. Not a polite chuckle, but a full, genuine laugh that echoed through the living room. Elena shot him a glare that could have frozen lava. But I definitely noticed, the tiniest twitch at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but not quite not a smile either. Progress. Dinner was a considerably quieter affair than the last one. The table was still set with museum-quality dishware. The food was still elaborate and probably took an entire day to prepare. But the atmosphere was different, less performative, less tense. Elena asked polite questions about Sophia's work, about my work, about whether we'd had a chance to watch that new show everyone was talking about. The questions were surface level, but genuinely interested, not loaded with hidden agenda or ulterior motive. She didn't switch to Italian once, not even a little bit, not even when she was talking to Antonio about something mundane, like whether they needed more olive oil. She spoke English the entire evening, and I couldn't tell if that was out of respect, caution, or just sheer determination not to give me any ammunition. But here's the thing about sitting through dinner with someone who's trying very hard to be on their best behavior. You start to see the effort, and the effort itself is actually kind of endearing. Every time Elena caught herself about to say something judgmental and visibly course-corrected, every time she took a breath before asking a question to make sure it wasn't invasive, every time she smiled at me without that edge of evaluation, it was visible. The woman was working overtime to reset our relationship, and I had to respect that. About halfway through the main course, some kind of chicken dish that was probably called something fancy in Italian, but I wisely didn't ask, something clattered in the kitchen. We all heard it, a distinct crash followed by the sound of liquid hitting the floor. "The wine!" Elena gasped, jumping up from her chair. She rushed to the kitchen, and we all followed to find that a bottle of red wine had somehow fallen from the counter and shattered on the floor, creating a crimson crime scene all over her pristine white tiles. "Oh no, oh no," Elena muttered, already grabbing paper towels, her carefully maintained composure cracking. "This is the grout stain. I just had these cleaned." "Hey, it's okay," I said, and before I could overthink it, I knelt down and started helping her clean up the glass. Just wine, just tiles, nothing that can't be fixed. Sophia grabbed the mop while Antonio got the dustpan, and for a few minutes we all just worked together cleaning up the mess. No drama, no blame, just a family dealing with a minor domestic disaster. When the floor was finally clean, or at least clean enough that we weren't going to track red footprints through the house, Elena stood up and looked at me, really looked at me, like she was seeing me properly for the first time. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For helping? Of course," I replied. "Besides, accidents happen to everyone, even the best." I paused, then added with a slight grin, "and the bilingual." I held my breath, not sure if the joke would land or if I just torpedoed the entire evening's worth of détente. Elena stared at me for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, and I'm not making this up, she chuckled, actually chuckled. It was small, barely more than an exhale with humor attached, but it was genuine. "Even the bilingual," she repeated, shaking her head. "You're terrible." "I've been told," I said, and Antonio laughed from behind us. We returned to dinner, and something had shifted. The conversation flowed more naturally. Elena told a story about her own mother, Sophia's grandmother, who apparently had been even more formidable and judgmental than she was, which explained a lot, actually. Antonio chimed in with embarrassing stories about Sophia as a kid, which she pretended to hate but was clearly enjoying. I contributed some stories about my own chaotic family gatherings, including the time my uncle tried to deep fry a turkey and nearly burned down the garage. When dessert came out, Panna cotta this time, not tiramisu, probably a strategic choice. Elena served it without ceremony or comment. We ate and talked, and it felt almost normal, like we were just a family having dinner, not actors performing carefully scripted roles. As the evening wound down and Sophia and I prepared to leave, Elena walked us to the door. Antonio had already given us both hugs and extracted a promise from me to meet for coffee again soon. And now it was just the three of us standing in that grand foyer. "Thank you for coming," Elena said, directing the comment mostly at me. "I know the last time was difficult." "Water under the bridge," I said, meaning it, or wine under the tiles, as the case may be. She smiled. Actually smiled. A real one that reached her eyes. "You're growing on me, Daniel. Slowly. Like mold." I laughed, surprised and delighted by the comparison. "That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me." "Don't let it go to your head," she replied. But there was warmth in her voice now. Actual warmth. In the car on the way home, Sophia grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "That went well," she said, sounding almost surprised. "It did," I agreed. "Your mom made an effort, a real one." "She called you mold," Sophia pointed out. "Affectionately," I protested. "That was affectionate mold comparison, totally different from regular mold comparison." Sophia laughed, and I realized something important. We were going to be okay, all of us. It wasn't going to be perfect, and there would probably be more awkward dinners and tense moments and cultural misunderstandings. But we'd figured out how to communicate, in English, in Italian, and in the universal language of cleaning up spilled wine together. And sometimes, that's all you really need. Months passed, and something unexpected happened. Elena softened. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually, like ice melting in spring. She started sending random texts at weird hours, recipe links at 6 a.m., news articles about topics she thought I'd find interesting, baby name ideas, which was absolutely wild, considering Sophia and I weren't even pregnant and had never mentioned having kids anytime soon. "Why is your mom sending me a list of Italian baby names?" I asked Sophia one morning, staring at my phone in confusion. "Because she's planning your entire future," Sophia replied without looking up from her coffee. "Just roll with it." The texts kept coming. Sometimes they were helpful. "This article about retirement planning might interest you." Sometimes they were random. "Did you know flamingos can only eat with their heads upside down?" And sometimes they were just nice. "Hope you're having a good day." Then one evening my phone rang. Elena's name appeared on the screen, and I genuinely considered not answering because phone calls from your mother-in-law rarely bring good news. A year later, Sophia and I hosted them for dinner. Same menu, same setup, but now I was the cook, which felt like some kind of cosmic role reversal. I'd spent all afternoon preparing lasagna using a recipe Elena had texted me months earlier, and honestly, it turned out pretty damn good. When Elena took her first bite, she looked genuinely impressed. "This is excellent, Daniel, really excellent." "Careful," I said, grinning. "That's how you end up liking your son-in-law." "Too late," she smirked. "I already do." We laughed, all of us, and it felt natural, real. After dessert, Elena did something that shocked me. She switched to Italian, slowly, nervously, like she was testing out new words. "Grazie per avermi insegnato il rispetto." Thank you for teaching me respect. I raised my glass, feeling my throat tighten unexpectedly. "E grazie a lei per avermi insegnato la pazienza e come non soffocare con il tiramisù." And thank you for teaching me patience and how not to choke on tiramisu. Everyone laughed. That night, I realized something important. Families don't always start with love. They sometimes start with translation.